I'd like to welcome Peter Roper to today's Chewing the Cud.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you for those attending. This has been an interesting project for me because Hannah and I were just talking and before it came on air, and I was saying that people quite often share or offer to loan me information that they have about Express Dairy and its related companies, and there are all sorts of different forms in which that happens. I'm currently working on a dozen 16mm cine films that someone loaned me. I've had them digitized and currently working through them, improving them, and trying to remove some of the artifacts and such like to make them presentable. And eventually they'll go on YouTube and on our website. This particular topic that I'm talking about this afternoon was again in a small creamery in Shropshire. I already had quite a lot of material about it. I think I've got 270 images and stories about the creamery already. And they offered me this rusty steel box full of documents. This is from the farm where the creamery originally started. And I've had them for several months because it's quite a lot of work to go through them all. And out of that have come 350 properly documented images and such like, all about what happened when in the dairy and how it started. So that's how we got to the topic of today's session. Ruyton-XI-Towns, I'll explain the strange name in a minute, is just the northwest of Shrewsbury. You can see on the map here. And the farm where it all started is right in the centre of the village, called at this time Ruyton-of-the-XI-Towns. This is an old map. The original farm was where the red circle is, and the creamery they eventually established was just literally 100 yards up the road. So the village itself has got quite an old history. It was actually granted a royal charter by King Edward II in 1308. And the reason for its strange name is that there were 11 little towns, although I don't think we'd even call them towns. The villages, or barely that even, they're listed here on the slide. Perhaps I should say Hannah's got a copy of the PDF of this, so if you want a bit more information, she'll send it to you afterwards, because I realise there's a bit too much here to take in, and I'm not going to attempt to talk over every single bullet point. But one interesting little snippet there is was in 1878, Arthur Conan Doyle was living in the village as a medical assistant. And he described rather aptly Ruyton as being a small townlet in Shropshire, which rejoiced in the extraordinary name of Ruyton of the 11 towns. And as he says, it's not big enough for one town, far less 11. And the nearest most recent population I could find was only 1,379 people. So I think you probably argue the same still applies. But there we are, right in Ruyton-XI-Towns it is. And interestingly, the company was founded by William Howe Gittins. This is the grandfather of the people who loaned me this information in 1918. And one of the things that surprised me a bit was, in fact, the armistice wasn't signed for the First World War until November 1918, yet the company was formed in June 1918. And I don't know whether this was a general thing or not, whether people realised the war was coming to an end and wanted to invest in new things, but it did strike me as a bit strange. And if anyone's got any information about that, it'd be nice to know. But as was normal with these things, the Articles Association was couched in very wide terms, as you can see here. So they could do virtually anything that related to food of any type, I think, or being colour merchants, chemists, or druggists, carmen and carriers as well. So I think this is actually fairly typical of the era and probably still now, but interesting that such a wide objective was started. In 1922, they formed a public limited company, and the directors of the company were all local farmers. And in fact, the names that you're seeing here, Lloyd, Suckley, Timmis, Slater, etc., the families are still farming in the same area today. So obviously this is quite interesting for those families as well. Um, the shareholders too were nearly all local farmers. So on the left we see a share certificate for Mr. William Alfred Tutton. I think he actually was the company secretary. And there were £1 shares initially for £10,000, and then later on it was increased to 13,800. But although that doesn't sound very much, in fact, at today's prices, that's equivalent to £735,000. So, £750,000. So this wasn't a small enterprise by any means. The shareholders then, here's an example, the list on the left, one of the things that I scanned, and you can see there on the left column here, the occupation, nearly all farmers, farmer, miller and farmer, general dealer, and many of them only had the minimum number of shares, which were £10 shares. Mr. Gittins, who started it, though, he had the biggest shareholding, over £1,000. So what we're seeing here is that the creamery was a very important part of this community and of the farming enterprise nearby. It wasn't a trivial thing at all. It was very important to what they wanted to achieve. They expanded straight away. In 1928, they bought another creamery at a nearby town called Whittington, just a few miles up the road. And even more importantly, they acquired a Birmingham dairy that had 2 sites, but that very importantly gave an outlet for liquid milk, because throughout the history of dairying, liquid milk has always achieved a higher price than milk for manufacture or cheese making, and that still applies today as well. So this gave them an opportunity to sell liquid milk at a higher price and for it not to all go into cheese. Because although cheese making was a useful way, if you like, of storing milk, it wasn't without disadvantages, because obviously if you were making cheese, the cheese went into store, went to mature. It may have taken a year or so before it was sold, and all the money that was paid for the milk was then tied up in stock, which had to stay there, and there were costs of running the cheese stores as well. Just make a note as well, this was Cheshire cheese that was produced at this time. It wasn't cheddar, cheddar came later, but this was Cheshire, and that was common for many of the creameries in the middle part of England at that time. The idyllic cottage on the left here was actually demolished for the new creamery to be built. So probably we wouldn't have done that this day, but there you are, that was what was demolished, and the new creamery was put in its place. But as you can see from the right-hand picture, this was a fairly agricultural looking enterprise. There's nothing high-tech here at all, is it? A collection of old buildings with perhaps 1 or 2 new ones, some milk churns in the background on a cart, but nothing too exciting. This picture is actually from the 1940s, we believe. The company also acquired property in the village and surroundings. Some cottages and houses were rented out to employees. Others were rented out to whoever wanted to live in them. And this letter's quite interesting, dated September 1922. The company was allowed to deduct 3 shillings a week from this Mr. Butler, William Butler's wages in lieu of rent. So he was an employee at the dairy at the time. Lots of complications arose, as you might expect from an enterprise of this size. And this is a handwritten schedule from the Motor Union Insurance Company. And it's just a reminder of the days when insurance policies, and in fact all business transactions, were all handwritten. There were agents that used to travel around to different places, write down the policies, premiums and such like. And this document's also interesting because it gives a little bit of an idea of how many people were employed and what they did. They had to have a license to keep petroleum, and they had a Chevrolet and a Daimler lorry that they used for carting milk around. So they had a license from the local authority, also a street district. Transport costs were always very important, and this is a few checkbook stubs that I've scanned. Note the one on here for the Great Western Railway. This is just a month's carriage, £670. That's an enormous amount of money for that time, 1932. Tens of thousands of pounds in today's value, and other smaller costs as well. Occasionally, the vehicles were involved in accidents. This is rather interesting, perhaps slightly amusing letter from a local veterinary surgeon who examined a crossbred bullock who'd been injured with a collision with one of the dairy's vehicles, and in turn this was referred on to the motor union insurance company to be settled. Also, you couldn't buy very much specialist equipment at this time, so they needed a cheese press in order to make hard cheese of this sort. After the initial process, cheese is put in usually into a metal mold and then pressed under great pressure. And this is a cheese press drawing, and this was commissioned by the dairy, and the work was carried out by W.H. Smith and Co., not the one that you're thinking of, but a local iron and steel manufacturing organization in a local village. So they made the cheese presses and other similar equipment. This is a fascinating part of the archive because in 1930, the company advertised in the Farmer and Stockpig magazine for a post of cheesemaker. And at this time, dairy training and qualifications were well advanced, and there were many colleges and universities who offered training in dairy science and similar. And one thing I think particularly fascinating is that many of the applications, I've probably got 20 or more here for this particular post, were from female college stage students, because for females at that time, single females in particular, dairying was a very respectable profession and well thought of as well. So a lot of girls came from farms. This is a letter from Gwen Williams, who describes herself as a farmer's daughter and fully qualified dairymaid. She'd got a national diploma in dairying from Reading. Here's another one, Phyllis Barlow. She was 25 years old, just finished 3 terms at Cheshire Dairy College. And many of the colleges and universities that applications were received from in 1930s are still in existence today, including my own university. I went to Nottingham, to Sutton Bonington, which interestingly enough, only in the last few weeks, you may have seen in the press, have announced they're discontinuing all their agriculture and dairying courses. So yeah, things move on. So here's a reference letter from the University College of Wales in Aberystwyth. Obviously, there were tend to be quite a few Welsh applicants, because we were talking here, Ruyton is just literally 10 miles, 5 or 10 miles from the Welsh border. So Miss Emily Jones had done 2 years at the University College of Wales and worked at 3 different local creameries as well. So what we're seeing here is the importance of the dairy sector as an employer and giving opportunities for women as well as men. Just a bit more on the financial side now. This is a balance sheet from 1920, and the total value of the business at that time was not far short of £1 million at today's prices, and quite significant. And if we move on a little bit to expenditure, this is the expenditure, the income of £2,300 was £121,000 at today's prices. Obviously, buying the milk was the biggest expense, but interestingly enough, buying coals for the boilers was also another big expense. So I guess people were concerned about energy costs even then. And here we've got a look at the Ruyton boiler men looking very happy with their coal-fired steam boiler. now we're moving into the 1930s, and obviously economic conditions in the country were very poor at that time, and specifically there were low milk and cheese prices. And although the company's asset value appreciated a lot in the end of the 30s to £2.5 million, the uncertainty of milk pricing and such like was beginning to get more and more important. But nevertheless, the company at this point was a very substantial and successful company. Every month, the directors had a meeting to discuss milk prices for the previous month, and that was based obviously on how much was supplied, what the demand was like, and what the quality of milk was like. And there were lots of discussions about how to manage the irregularity of supplies, because obviously in the spring and summer months there's much more natural grass, yields of cows go up, but then of course the price goes down. So a lot of discussion about this. And I did a graph of the milk prices that were being offered, and the purple line here shows the serious decline in milk prices towards the end of 1932 and 1933. And this was well below the cost of production. So milk was being sold by farms at a loss at this time. And even the government became concerned about this, because not only were they no doubt concerned by the farmers' lobbying, but also there was concern about the supply of milk being guaranteed for consumers as well. And various things led on from that. In 1930, the National Farmers Union threatened a milk strike involving withholding milk supplies in order to try to persuade the government to have some better system for milk pricing. And in fact, at this meeting on the document on the left in 1932, Ruyton Dairies agreed to withhold milk from the market to support this strike. However, it backfired on them because, unfortunately, as Mr. Gittins reported here, while we were withholding the sale of our milk, others were selling. And once a settlement was made, many buyers had already bought their requirements. As he says, we're today reaping the reward of our folly, which has taught us a lesson we shall not soon forget. So it wasn't all plain sailing. The company was fortunate, though, because a lot of the milk went from Baschurch Station just down the road to Paddington on the Great Western Railway. And Rice and Cooperative Dairies were very lucky because they had important contracts for supplying milk in London. And that included Guy's, Hammersmith, and West Middlesex hospitals, which are all going today, except for Hammersmith, I think. And they needed to employ someone in London to collect the milk and take it to the customers in London. And here we are. Here's a letter of contract with J. Williams and Son, pure milk specialists trading as West Kensington Creameries. And they would pick up the milk from Paddington Station in these conical 17-gallon churns that were in use at that time. The cylindrical 10-gallon churns didn't come until later, and then haul them to the hospital customers in West London. There was concern by the railways at this time as well, because the railways were saying that they were losing revenue to road transport. So this trend, which obviously continued later, had just started at that time. And they complained that the laws regulating road transport were not being enforced, like speed limits, hours of duty, and such like, and that there should be a higher tax regimen on road transport. And in fact, they were listened to, because in 1933 there was the Rail Traffic Act, which set out a licensing system for hauliers as well. So there was a lot. So the railways, having taken over from the canals, were now beginning to feel the pressure from the roads, and they didn't like it. The government was concerned generally about the whole issue of milk marketing in England and Wales, and there'd been various proposals, none of which were successful. But a new scheme was developed as the Permanent Joint Committee set up in 1933, where the idea was to have common pricing for all milk, no matter where it went to, whether it was going for cheese to manufacture or for liquid, and the concept of making the farmers through their milk price, making a contribution to milk publicity costs to allow the dairy industry to try to expand its sales volumes. And ultimately, that led to the setting up of the Milk Marketing Board in 1933. And once that had happened, anybody with more than 6 cows had to sell their milk to the board. So what that meant, in effect, was that the whole purpose of Ruyton cooperative dairies really diminished then, because now they were operating a creamery, but they didn't really have any control over the pricing or the purchasing of the milk any longer. So what then happened in 1936 was that Kraft Foods, American company, took over their creamery in Ruyton and also the one at Whittington. And here's a charming picture of the 1930s of the creamery staff all lined up and very proud of their jobs and everything else. Because this, if we look at the next slide as well, these were sort of a family affair. Everybody in the village would work, or nearly everyone would work at the creamery, and they were a major employer. Even the dog, it seems, was an employer there. And it was a golden period, if you like, for these rural economies. In 1954, Express Dairy acquired both the creameries. I remember at this time milk was still arriving in churns. There were over 600 farmers supplying milk at this time. As far as Express was concerned, though, they already operated 15 creameries throughout the UK. So to them, it was a logical expansion. And there was a lot of other acquisitions made by the company at this time. Wasn't all plain sailing though, because the creamery was blamed for extending their borehole and running the village dry of water, because like a lot of rural villages, there was no pipe water supply at that time, and the village drew all its water from wells. And in fact, the dairy had to supply water to the village residents in churns from a bowser because there wasn't enough to go around. The sort of concept of a family company was still very much existing in the 1960s, and social functions. So this was, I guess, the late Christmas dairy party held in Shrewsbury in 1960. And everyone's there in their finery and long ladies in their lovely dresses and things. And this was very much a part of life, not only at this creamery, but all the ones that I've been documenting. Back in the factory, we're seeing a little bit more automation here, but the local people here would all be known to each other. They were all members of the same family, and it remained a very important local employer. But very much the rural idyll here. The cows, the creamery nestling in the green Shropshire fields. Nothing was going to disturb that really. This was the continuation of what started after the First World War and was still carrying on even in the early 1960s. But later on, it became more industrialized, and there was big new investment in the 1970s. Automatic cheddar equipment was installed, and interesting as well, a spray dryer for processing the whey powder, because whey, which is the liquid that comes out of the cheese when it's during manufacture, when it's been pressed, that was regarded as a waste product right up to this time. It wasn't until the dryer was installed that it was used then as now for food manufacture as ingredients. So as it was a waste product, most creameries, including this one, had a pig farm attached to it. In the case of Ruyton, there was a pipeline that went directly from the creamery down to the piggery so the pigs could eat the whey, or drink it, much I should say. This is an actual picture from another express creamery at Holywood near Dumfries in 1961. So still very much happening in the 60s. Later on, much more automation. We're in the 1980s now, highly automated cheese packing area, a dryer control room. Still not everything was smooth. All the local residents were complaining about unpleasant odours from the creamery's effluent plants, and this actually was a feature in nearly all the creameries at that time. People obviously didn't want smells coming from the effluent plants, and Express and other dairy companies had to build their own effluent plants. And there was a bit of a conflict here because the local residents wanted the smell sorted out, whereas Express were at the same time trying to sort out their commitments to meet statutory requirements for river pollution. So there was a bit of a conflict here. Um, Moving on a bit further, we see milk, of course, arriving by tanker. We see automatic cheese making equipment and extensive whey storage and processing stainless steel vessels here. So all still looking good, but 1993, the end of an era, as the local paper announced. From 1918 to 1993, there were 75 years of continuous cheese making and 213 people's jobs were affected. And as it says, stunned staff facing to creamery bombshell, probably a little bit of license by the headline writer there, but it was a significant event. And many people in the village who'd had secure employment didn't have it anymore. So it wasn't quite the end, though, because I visited the site a couple of years ago, 18 months ago. It's now a base for a transport company, but unbelievably, it's still used as a cheese store. And you can see the crates of cheese. These are photos that I took. And there are millions of pounds of cheese in these same buildings that were erected then, still in store there. Just to say in conclusion, huge thanks to Kate Main and the Gittins family at Hall Farm, Ruyton, who loaned this fascinating material. The rusty steel box is on the left there. And when I gave it back to them this last weekend just gone, everything was all sorted, all the metal staples are removed and replaced with plastic clips. Everything was documented, put in envelopes and categorized. And I've got over 20 categories. And as I mentioned earlier, there's over 350 documents. The whole of the archive is on my website, expressdairytales.uk. If you are interested, there's a link here to a cheese making video which shows how cheese was made in the period we're talking about. And I hope you found it a little bit interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I found it far more than a little bit interesting. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. I've learned a lot about cheese manufacturers as well. Um, I don't know if anyone has any particular questions for Peter. Lots of applause coming through on the virtual screen. Um, I, I might kick off and just ask, how unusual was the cooperative in your experience, sort of that kind of way of dairy farmers coming together? Is this a tale that's repeated in the country, or very much
It's repeated, yes. And not
Mhm.
only is it repeated here, but I've just found an interesting document in the NMB magazine about a similar cooperative in Holland as well, where similar things were happening. So, no, I'm not saying this is any way unique. It was a common
Mm.
way for farmers to try to protect their interest and sort of gang together a bit to give themselves a little bit more muscle in the market. Um, and interestingly enough, it was in the news only last week again in the national press. Farmers are yet again complaining that there's been a big drop in milk prices this last month, and they're being asked now to supply milk to Arla and to others at lower than their production costs. So the whole thing has gone round a complete circle, I think, in that time. And I don't think anyone's really ever resolved it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions for Peter? By all means, uh, come on screen or pop it in the chat. Deborah, I don't know if you want to ask your question or if you're
I
unable
can
to.
ask it.
Yeah,
If yeah,
you
I was
can.
just wondering about the context of synthetic cheese, and that could be soy-based or you name it, and how that affected the dairy, and whether or not synthetic cheese is what's sold today through the buildings or whether it's a dairy product.
No, virtually everything you saw in the cheese store picture would be dairy-based cheese. I think non-dairy cheese is still a very much specialist thing in the UK. Um, I I think from memory, it's less than 5% of the total output. So yeah, so and I don't think it would have affected anything in this era at all that I've been talking about, because no one even thought of the concept of it, I don't believe. So no, I don't think it's significant, certainly not in the context of this and what tends to go on now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deborah.
Can I just ask a question as
Yeah.
well? I was just wondering, I had a really quick look at your website, which is massive. And I just wondered how many objects you actually have got physically, or have you got most things just digitally?
Well, I was saying to Hannah earlier, I do feel a bit of a fraud sometimes because I'm not a museum. I'm
You don't want
I'm
to
not
be
really a
museum.
collector either. In fact, I don't really like people giving me things because I don't know what to do with them, except perhaps give them away again, and such like. Um, so, but to answer your first question, I think I've got 15,000 items now on the website, and everything, if you've had a look, is categorized into location and all sorts of different categories. And I never thought when I started this enterprise about 3 years ago that there would be as much or indeed any interest in it, because I used to work for Express Dairy for 17 years. After that, I founded a software company and did that for most of my life. But so I had quite a lot of magazines and material from those times, but I never thought it would be of interest. And it never ceases to amaze me how much interest there is. And people are giving me or loaning me, hopefully, things every week. I mentioned in my introduction, I've just been doing cine films. I mean, it's a constant thing. So, my attitude to it is perhaps a bit different to some of you, because, for example, I don't have any qualms about improving the material that I'm given. I don't have a thing about keeping it in the exact same condition, because obviously this is a digital archive, and I like to present it in a way that maximizes its enjoyment and the ability to understand it. So even some of the Ruyton cooperative dairies material has been extensively edited and improved, and I've removed artifacts from pictures and things like that. So I'm not really very conventional in my approach, probably, but hopefully it's still interesting to people.
Did you ever do anything like a display anywhere on it? Because I can imagine with so much information, it's quite hard to make a display. But I don't know if you've ever done it.
I've done one like that, which was that there was an exhibition put on in Didcot in Berkshire about the Didcot dairy, and I supplied material for that. And I've got facilities here for large format printing and things as well. So I did do some work for that. But no, most of it is digital, and there's a Facebook group associated with this, which most people use for contacting me, although you can contact me through the website. So yes, it's a digital archive, and I've got some material actually give to the Museum of English Rural Life in return for what they've given me. So I do have material that I give away, but I'm not interested. It's not a commercial enterprise. I'm not interested in those things at all. It's purely done for the love of the job or whatever.
Peter, you were telling me earlier that sort of one thing leads to another. So you'll be given some images, for example, and then someone else comes and provides more images and sort of expands that story. I guess it's that thing. You've become the depository for kind of sharing those stories and celebrating those archives that might just go unexplored in people's bottom drawers or in rusty tin boxes, really, aren't they?
Two aspects of that. One is the real danger of losing this material forever, because people come across things like this, people clearing out someone's house after someone's died, maybe something like that, just goes in a skip. No one thinks there's any interest in it at all, and there's a big danger of this material disappearing. And another aspect of it is not the images themselves, but the memories that they generate. And I'm very keen to, quite often I'll put together nothing more than a slide of people's memories and what they remember and comments they've made, not actual pictures at all. And it's fascinating that one thing triggers another to another to another. And I think these thoughts that people have and memories of the past, they're hard to capture, aren't they? And they can't really be captured exactly by objects. They're not objects, they're in people's minds. So I'm sort of very keen to try to capture those and make them available for future.
Have you ever done any sort of oral history recordings or anything, Peter, of the people that you talk to, or is it transcriptions more than
I haven't
recordings?
really done that. I have thought about it. Um, Perhaps I don't feel confident in being able to do that. So most of my material, I have got some interviews that I have got hold of that I didn't record myself, but I've transcribed them and tried to put them in an interesting document with some pictures and things like that as
Hmm.
well. And obviously the videos have got people talking in them as well. So yeah.
I don't want to add to your load with more suggestions of wonderful things you
Oh,
could do,
it's
because
a
you
good
seem to be
thing,
doing so
yes.
much with the
Yeah,
digitization as well, with the cine films and all of
yeah,
the Facebook group that I know sparks
yeah.
lots more conversations as well.
I guess it's something that museums also are interested in, how to hold people's interest through merely objects. It's not always an easy thing to achieve, I don't think, is it? And so I've obviously taken a completely different approach, but I guess we're all starting to do the same thing, really, is trying to generate interest in historical things and make them live for the future.
Yeah, and having that connection, so those sort of lived experiences, hearing from the people who worked in those dairies and they in those creameries, I think that kind of personal connection is what quite a lot of museums are often trying to do, where we do have the objects, but we're looking for those relevance, that sort of
Yeah,
relevance
yeah,
to ways of working.
I was just going to say as well, I think it's an important record because it helps to bring to mind how quickly things changed.
hmm,
So the world that we are all used to now, with all the lorries and whatnot, that wasn't until the 1990s. That feels quite
absolutely.
recent.
Yeah,
And that how much the processes and the family working and that sort of link into the local community remained stable up until really, it takes dairying as the focus, but there are all sorts, you can go into the history of transport and transportation,
yeah,
communities, presumably also it's how people are raising their cattle, because if you've mechanized the whole production, then you need to be producing on a different scale. So I imagine that picture, that rural idyll picture,
yes.
is now very different in that local area as well.
We're traveling in Shropshire last week. I didn't see any cows at all. Lots of grass, but no cows, some sheep. And then talking to the Gittins family, although there are some still very big dairy herds in isolated places around Cheshire and Shropshire, the rest of it still grass, of course, but there people were selling their grazing, selling forage to the big farms for indoor cattle housing and things like this. But the old days of dairy farming have gone. They just have disappeared. And you're right, what you said. These sort of enterprises were very important for rural communities, and it wasn't just the farms, but it was many people in rural areas. It was their livelihood and their children's and grandchildren's livelihood, right up until, as you said, the 1990s and a bit before, where these things are disappearing. And now I noticed the farms in Shropshire have got industrial units, office space they're renting out, stables for horse racing, things like that. All these sort of things have come in to fill the vacuum left by the farms and farming.
That's fascinating. Any final questions for Peter while we have him here?
Do you do you speculate about the future at all, or are you just about recording the past?
Good question. Most of the material was about the past. I don't know how would we predict the future, really. No, I think the past is what people seem to be interested in. I don't really know why, other than that it harks back to what many people see as a happier period, don't they? I think that's partly what people are looking at here. To, I'm getting comments all the time saying they were the good old days. I know, older people tend to always say that, perhaps, but genuinely they were better days in many ways, particularly in rural communities. So, yeah, I've probably fixed on the past. Sorry.
We're talking about
Happier place to
copyright.
be.
Yeah. Talking about copyright, and obviously you've been in touch with Arla, who I think we've worked out with the owners of the Express Dairy copyright
Yes.
nowadays. Are they interested in keeping their own archives, as it were? Are you aware
Um,
that they are, as a business, sort of interested in what you're doing for previous iterations of their company, and whether or
They
not
were very
they're true?
supportive, actually,
Hmm.
surprisingly so. I thought I would come
Yeah.
across resistance straight away, but I didn't. They said, yes, that we're a farmers' organisation. We want to support efforts like this. And so, obviously, they're not supporting other than the way of allowing me to use the material. But yes, they were very supportive. And I have actually started a section of the website looking at Arla's history as well. So, and I have to be very careful as well, although I've extended to the milk marketing board slightly because I used to work for the MMB myself as well. But it's very easy to get sucked into other parts of the dairy industry. People, I know someone else who, Job's Dairy, are very active. In fact, Job's at Hanworth and Didcott's, and they've got a big archive they've recently made publicly available. And there's someone else I know who's looking into the history of Unigate, or United Dairies as it was, but no one has got to the lengths that I have, and I think it want it, what there's a tendency for people to do is to just post pictures on Facebook or elsewhere, and they get comments, and then that's it, it disappears. But the difference between my approach is that though I've used that as a way of capturing material and getting interest, it's putting it into a permanent archive and having a website that enables people to access it, which seems to be the difference. And the fact that I've sorted things out into different categories makes it hopefully easier to find things that you want to know about.
A great database. I can feel the need for a cooperative of dairy archives now. The way you've kind of
Yes.
connected up with other
Yeah.
archivists working in
Yeah.
this field. Fantastic. Well, unless anyone's got any further questions to raise, or indeed discussion points, I'll call this chewing the cud to a close. And